Check 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, all good. I think Apple is doing their own original movie creations now, so that's in competition with Netflix. Oh, okay. Well, it's a competitive world, so. You see how much cash they have in the bank? He who has the cash wins, usually. Okay, ready? Okay. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Michael Crane. I teach here at Florida Atlantic University, and I'm also the director of FAU's Center for Forensic Accounting. We're gathered here at the Fort Lauderdale campus of FAU. We have some people here in the classroom, and we have a whole bunch of people online. So welcome to all of you. We have a guest speaker today who is going to be very interesting. And our talks that we have here are ordinarily related to some aspect of forensic accounting or investigation, that sort of thing. And this is a completely different spin on all of that. And I only met our guest speaker relatively recently, and it was a completely different aspect of forensic accounting that I had no idea about what it was. So our guest speaker is in the United States Army Reserves. In his civilian job, he is the managing partner of an accounting firm based in Miami. In his military responsibilities, he's a captain in the U.S. Army Reserves, and he's a member of the United States Southern Command, United States Southern Command based in Miami. The U.S. Southern Command is basically the military headquarters for military operations in South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. And the U.S. Central Command is led by a 4-star ranking member of the military, I think currently an admiral in the United States Navy. So our guest speaker is Captain Brian George. He is associated in his military capacity in a branch of the military called counter-threat finance. And essentially the way I understand it is this is the group in the military to intervene with basically terrorist-type threats of United States interest, but instead of the usual physical ways, it's the financial ways of intervening in all that. I'm sure that he'll have some more to say about that. The mission of the counter-threat finance group is to counter financing used to engage in terrorism, illicit trafficking networks, and related activities that support an adversary's ability to negatively affect U.S. interests. As far as his active military background, assignments, active duty assignments, they include a collection manager with the Afghan Threat Finance Cell in 2013 and 14. He was also assigned as an intelligence analyst with Task Force 2010 to 2013, and he's the Deputy Headquarters Commandant for the U.S. Southern Command in 2011 through 2013. And as I said, his civilian career, he's a managing partner of a Miami-based accounting firm, is Calas, C-A-L-A-S group, if you want to look it up. So let me introduce and please welcome Captain Brian George.
Thank you. Thank you all. So Dr. Crane is very polite. When he says that we've only known each other a short time, that's true. It's probably been now maybe about 3 months, and the conversation got started because I called him out of the blue and sent him an email. The poor man was probably thinking this is some guy from Africa trying to sell me $1 million policy that he has. why should I respond? And I kept chasing him down until finally we've connected. And really the hopes of this conversation and other conversations is to tie a little bit more of the public and the private sector together. It's important for you all to realize that those of us in the military and on the government side, we do need you all in the private sector. And in fact, that is how I became part of the military. So if you all bear with me a moment, I know it's a Saturday morning, but I need you to all think back. So go back 10 years now. And I'm sitting in my office, it's Friday afternoon, and an Army recruiter calls and says, hey, we'd be interested in doing a lunch and learn in your office to talk about something called counter-threat finance. So two things come up. One, don't ever answer the phone at 5 o'clock on a Friday, okay, because you never know what it's going to be. It's kind of like a box of chocolates. And two, I was like, the U.S. Army calling an accounting firm, what the hell is that about? Sure enough, between one thing and another, we say yes. Two gentlemen come in. They're in uniform, looking all sorts of impressive, and they go through this presentation. It must be the whole Army jingle and the song. Three of us end up joining the Army Reserves. Okay, so I'm 35 years old. I'm thinking I'm old. I'm uncoordinated. I can't sing. I can't dance. I can't throw a ball. The Army, yes, perfect. That's exactly what I need to do. And so as I start this process, I start learning a little bit more about what counter-threat finance is. And I know that's a mouthful, okay, counter-threat finance. So I'm going to go into depth as far as what it is and a little bit as far as what the branch does and some of the tools and tradecraft that we use. But at the same token, I want to kind of simplify it all for you. So as an accountant, my job is to kind of hide the money, let's face it. Okay, I want to make sure that my clients pay minimal amount of taxes. We're always looking for different loopholes in the law, really trying to score a little way. Stay away from folks like yourself here, IRS agent. But from the military's point of view, my job is to find the money. Okay, my job is to find the pools of cash, of working capital that illicit actors would use. And this can be from something as nefarious as just a money launderer, a professional money launderer. This could be a terrorist organization. This could be a transnational criminal organization. Okay? This could be for proliferation, avoidance of sanctions. Okay? So when we talk about weapons of mass destruction and things of that nature, it's all about the money. It's always been about the money. And I think that is the part that always attracted me to the counter-threat finance mission. Okay? Because my slogan in Afghanistan was, or the group's slogan was, no bucks, no boom. Very simple. If you don't have the money to pay for things, you can't operate. It takes somebody who's crazy with money is dangerous. Crazy with no money, you're just crazy. Okay? And so that, in a nutshell, is the overall concept. And this is also the conflict between the private and public sector. They're my client. They're the enemy. Okay? And this is what goes on day to day. Okay? So I'm going to, in this presentation, and I apologize that it may seem a little squirrely. I've been in an airport for the last 24 hours, just kind of flew in, and that's why I'm unshaven and unfortunately in the same clothes for the last 48 hours. But what I'd like to do is weave in my background, the professional background as well too, and then in terms of the military and how it all weaves together. Okay? So I swear to God it'll make sense in the end. Okay, so just bear with me. So this here is a presentation that we've given in the past to DoD, so Department of Defense, and we'll do this to introduce counter-threat finance to our population. Okay? And to understand the population, first you have to understand some of the military acronyms that exist and our positions. So yes, I am a captain in the Army Reserves, but I'm also a military intelligence officer. Okay? Everybody in the military has what's called a MOS, a mission occupational specialty. That's a long way of saying your job. Okay? So my job, I'm a 35 Delta, which means I'm an all-source intelligence analyst. The training that each military branch gives you, whether it's Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, Coast Guard, well, we won't forget the Coast Guard. We make fun of them a lot, but we won't forget them. Okay? We're actually mean about like everybody who's not Army. Okay? Is that you get trained up for about 16 weeks, if not longer, on a trade craft on how to be a military intelligence either officer or enlisted. Okay? You do that for the Army, you do that in a place called Fort Huachuca. Okay? It's a base in Arizona. It's on the border of hell and nothing. Okay? It's like literally in the middle of nowhere. They use rocks for landscaping there. Okay? So you get all this training out. You're a basic intelligence analyst. And then from there, you go to a specialty school for what your job is going to be. However, when it comes to counter-threat finance, the reason why they did a reach back to my office is because you can't train up somebody in 16 weeks or longer to truly understand accounting, finance, money laundering, okay, the banking side of the equation, the finance, okay, financial services, really the products. So they have to reach back to the private sector for this. That's the relationship of how that gets started, okay? Because what they realized after 9/11 is that the enemy really outsmarted us because they just outplanned us and outfinanced us. And it didn't take that much money. I mean, the tower attack was really very low cost. Okay? They spent 2 years doing pilot training. They spent about $120,000. I mean, that's what they spent. They lived also in the United States for those 2 years. They had their families here. So it was just regular living costs and things of that nature. So relatively a very cheap operation. But that money had flown in and out of the U.S. banking system. Prior to the attacks on 9/11, like any good business, that they knew that we were going to close, what did they do? They closed out the bank accounts. And they transferred the money back so they could use what was left over for other operations. Cash flow. Simple cash flow. Okay? So that's where we started realizing that it's not going to be, future operations are probably less about tanks versus tanks, but now sanctions, confiscations, okay, stopping money flows so that operations stop before they get started. Okay? So, well, this is actually, so these are actually some quotes that we've used several times. So from Al-Qaeda operative, there are two things that a brother must always have for jihad: the self and money. What I've been talking about for the last couple of minutes. And then trying to make myself look cool, we got a quote from Wu-Tang. So, cash rules everything around me. Get the money. Okay? I can never make this line sound cool. It's just not part of me. So, this is really, the essence of what counter-threat finance is. And counter-threat finance can also be commingled with, or cohabitate with something called financial intelligence. Okay? And that's really comes down to the information that we have now. Using it against the enemy is the counter portion. Okay? So why follow the money? I think we've kind of talked about it already, but to drive the point home, we follow the money because these organizations, both good and bad, require money for operations. The military, U.S. Army still needs money to buy equipment, pay people, transportation, so on and so forth. The enemy needs the same thing. They need to pay for men and equipment. Guns and butter, right? When I was in school, and it's terrible to say, so when I went to school, the internet was just coming out, okay? But in my econ classes, it was all about guns and butter. That was the big example always. Okay, I don't know if they're still doing that. You guys still doing guns and butter? No? Okay. I guess. Yeah, you know, I was a part of a different generation. We needed guns and butter. I guess nobody has butter anymore, right? Is that the whole thing too? So when it comes down to it, so let's take, for example, the FARC in Colombia. Okay? So the FARC was a designated terrorist organization in Colombia. It's been around for about 50 years. It was started based on ideology and then converted from there. It was considered a terrorist organization for not only kidnapping, extortion, drugs, gun running, so on and so forth. Okay? But notice what happened to them. President Uribe comes into power in Colombia, and he goes hard after the FARC. He drops their numbers from 18,000, okay, strong, to half. Cuts them in half with military operations. This is strictly kinetic operations. Let's go out and kill the enemy. Cuts their numbers in half, but the organization still survives, and in fact, cash flow-wise, never even had a decline. Why? Because just like a typical business owner, they adapted to the market that they were faced with. Okay? So think of it this way. They had at one point, they would actually grow the marijuana, they would grow the coca leaves, they would do the refining of the product, they would handle the distribution, the full supply chain. That takes a lot of people, manpower, a lot of money. They realized, wait a sec, we have less people. Plus, more people we have to pay, more people we have to feed, more people we have to clothe. It starts actually becoming like a community. Then you have entitlement programs, benefits. All these things exist, even for the enemy. Okay? And they realized, wait a second, let's do this. Instead of us being involved in the whole production, let's outsource it. So they say to the companies, you know what, you grow it, you do it. We will just have a guy on a mountaintop with a rifle and a pen and paper. And he's going to just track product, shipment, growing rates, what's going on. We're just going to take a piece of the pie. We'll supply protection for you. So now it becomes more of a cohabitation, more of a parasite type of relationship. Okay? And they realized that it doesn't take as much money and as much manpower to do this. So cash continues to flow through the organization, no matter what. Okay? This is the new face of the enemy. Okay? They're just like regular business owners, thinking the same way. They will actually create balance sheets, profit and loss statements, track the cash. They have internal corruption that they have to control. Okay? Shrinkage, I guess we call it, or maybe not anymore. Okay? So all of these factors still exist. So what we're looking at here is the impacts of that money that the enemy has, not only on us versus them, but when I talk about the FARC, look at what it does to the overall economy of a country, that corruption that exists. Every Colombian will tell you, I don't support the FARC. This is where it gets complicated. You and I may not individually be supporting the FARC, but the organizations we work for possibly in a somewhat indirect fashion are. Because just like I talked about, they cut the number of folks that they have and they change their strategy. Well, at the same token too, they change their partnerships. Instead of me coming to you and saying, okay, you got to pay me $1,000 a week, you say to your FARC representative, hey, why don't we partner together? Instead of you taking money from me every week, let's go into business together, grow the business together, and we'll both do better. And of course I'm going to say, yes, that's a fantastic idea. But by the way, this cattle ranch, you're going to buy all your feed from my other partner. And your feed store, you're going to get all your merchandise from my other partner. Now what ends up happening is now we're all indirectly involved with each other and indirectly involved with a criminal organization. Okay? There are so many statistics out there, and the ranges are huge in terms of what the FARC had in its coffers and the effect of the economy. I mean, at some point they said they were close to like a third of the economy. Okay? Unfortunately, they don't publicize financials like a regular, public company, so we'll never know exactly. But those statistics are pretty impressive just by themselves. Okay? So, money laundering in general, I'm assuming everybody in the room has a working knowledge of money laundering. As forensic accountants is probably like chapter 1, right? Okay? So, we're not going to go into placement and layering and things of that nature. In fact, for us, doctrinally, okay, in terms of how we define things, we define it as simple. How do they raise? How do they use? How do they move? And how do they store money? And that's exactly how we describe it. Okay? And so, don't worry, I've tripped like 4 times here. Okay? So, what you'll see is, and I've talked about it already when I was talking about the FARC, in terms of the relations. I don't want you to just focus on the word terrorism because it's more than just terrorism. Okay? These organizations are involved with so much more than just terrorism. The amount of money that these organizations has the ability to influence, okay, whole economies, okay, behavioral patterns, okay. That's where it really starts to get dangerous. But they become parasites or just service-oriented. So the difference there on simple terms is, think about Prohibition. You were involved in illegal activity because it was just supply and demand. Okay? Parasitic would be more in the sense of, now I'm extorting you, you have to be part of the process. Okay? I don't care if you survive, I'm going to take whatever I can for as long as I can. Okay? Now, we have seen some amazing things since counter-threat finance has been around. So if you look at efforts against ISIS, for example, there's the direct connection is on the kinetic operations that took place. We went after immediately their sources of income, petroleum. Those are where the initial rockets were sent. Okay, to control those inflows of money. Okay. In Afghanistan, poppy, largest producer of opium, still. Okay, the Taliban itself is heavily funded because of narcotics. They sell most of those narcotics in Europe just because of location. Okay? And then the run on the banks that took place. So the U.S. comes into Afghanistan, and a lot of the lessons that we learned from Vietnam were very helpful to us, but now the war changed completely because it was no longer kinetic. And now we had to learn a whole new set of rules. And so we came in there very quickly, and we were able to set up security, but now we had to get into running an economy. And that's where it gets very difficult as well too, because now we're looking at informal and formal economies, okay? So as you'll see, not only are we looking at the who and the what and what they're doing is, but we're also looking at the why, okay? And I know as you're sitting there, you're like, wow, as an accountant, I got to do all of this? Like, this is a lot more than just numbers. I just want to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, right? You know? This particular profession gets involved with a whole lot more than just looking at the numbers, okay? And like you do right now in your coursework, you probably have to come up and you have to analyze the numbers, and you have to give a business owner, okay, or the team leader for your audit or things of that nature, what is going on, the why, okay? What is the motivation to do this, okay? And that's why we look at 5 W's, okay, within our program, okay? So with that, let's talk a little bit about what it takes to be on this side. And this is not an Army recruiting video or anything like that either, okay? But I want you to understand that it's a little bit more than what you would typically think. So as I mentioned, you go through that 16 weeks for intelligence training. You also still have the basic training aspect of it. And everybody in the military, doesn't matter what your mission occupational specialty is, you still revert back to an 11 Bravo, which is an infantry soldier, okay? You always have to know how to shoot, maneuver, and communicate. Doesn't change, okay? If you're in a convoy and the convoy gets attacked, I'm Captain George. They're not sitting there going, hey, are you an accountant? You a lawyer? Doctor? Do I follow? Who's the guy who actually knows something? No. You're a captain. You got to be able to do it. Okay? So that is still part of it. But then what ends up happening is now you evolve a little bit further. Okay? The training itself is becoming a little bit more formalized. That's what we're talking to FAU about, to try to formalize a little bit more of the training. When we talk about certifications, so I have my background as far as education, and it seems like so long ago. I have a degree in finance, international business, accounting. I have a doctorate in economics. If I just finished like 2 classes, I swear. I've written the dissertation like 50 times. And then, so I've done my certification for anti-money laundering. There's an ACAM certification, which has now become kind of the national study, the standard, I'm sorry. I'm a certified financial manager. I've worked for companies like Merrill Lynch. I was actually on as technical analyst for a while, and I was also a financial consultant, so I understand the products, I understand some of the methodology. The accounting firm obviously helps quite a bit as well too. But it's that background, that understanding of all of these products and services that makes you a better investigator. Because when you look at the problem set, not only are you looking at, okay, we know that illegal mining goes on, for example, okay? But we have to go through the whole patterns and anomalies in terms of which companies are complicit and which companies are not complicit, okay? And it's the investigation that you all are learning how to do that becomes the foundation, okay? Now we take that to a different level using now investigative tools that are available to, unfortunately, just law enforcement itself, okay? Whether this is classified documents, whether it's signal, okay, document exploitation, human, which is actually interrogations, okay, that take place. Financial interrogations are very different than the tactical ones. So the tactical ones are, who's your leader, you know, and I'm going to scare you. From a financial investigation, when did you eat? What'd you eat? Where'd you eat? How'd they pay for it? Did everybody eat the same thing? Did you see them trade anything for the food? And so on and so forth. Because you're trying to figure out vendors, suppliers, distribution points. Okay? So it's really combining a lot of the different aspects of what you're already learning into now a financial investigation that will revert to a tactical operation. Intelligence always runs operations. Ultimately, my job is to find, kill, capture the enemy. If you take out, in Afghanistan, we realized if we took out the financier, the person who was in charge of the money flow, the other cells would wither away. Now, they would come back over a long period of times, but that disruption gave us opportunities, okay, to change the battle space. It becomes a force multiplier because the Taliban, when it came down to the financier, it was a close hold of information because of the internal theft and corruption. We would see message traffic come through from the Taliban. I need money. And the financier or somebody else, you know, the middleman, would say, no, there's no money available. Generals would make decisions based on that information thinking, oh, they're out of money. Perfect. Job well done. It was our group who told them, no, they're not out of money. It's a cash flow situation. Basic cash flow. Okay? Zakat. Zakat is a national donation, in a sense. Okay? That would take place. The extortion. The poppy that I just mentioned has certain growing and harvesting patterns. Okay? Weather. Was it cold or too early? Too late? Okay? It's a cash flow problem. They're going to start the fighting season, for sure. They're just going to start it maybe 30 days later because they don't have all the cash available to make sure that everybody has what they need. So here I am giving a brief in Afghanistan, and you got a bunch of people in front of you that usually outrank you. And here you are sitting there telling them, no, you're wrong. It's a cash flow problem. And they're looking at you like, cash flow? What the hell is that? I just want to kill somebody. Like, what do you mean, cash flow? And so I tell you this story because I always want you to remember that it still comes down to basic human nature. The Taliban, when they're doing that communication, it's just like parents talking to their children. I have a 9-year-old. Every time she sees me, Dad, I need $20. I want to buy this. I want to buy that. Every time she walks in the store, everything is hers. It should be hers. And what do I tell her? No, we don't have money for that. Does it mean I don't have the $20? Sometimes it does. But no, I just don't want to give it to her. Okay? Same with communications. Okay? So our job is to make sure that leadership understands the financial aspect to the enemy. Okay? Basic military doctrine is to prepare the battle space. So the leadership has to understand politics, economics, environment, movement, weather, anything that can affect soldiers from going from A to B to complete the mission. So our job is to concentrate on the financial aspect of it all. Okay? This is where we need folks like yourselves. Okay? In terms of career progression, what can you expect out of it? So, military, just like government in general, you're given a rank and you're given a pay grade based on that. So I could be the smartest guy in the room, but I'm just a captain. I will just get captain's pay. Okay? And I'm not the smartest guy in the room. Okay? No, by far not. Okay? However, as I progress within ranks, obviously the pay is better. In terms of benefits, you all can go online and you can see the benefits of what the military can offer you. Okay? I don't regret a day in uniform. I've never regretted a day in uniform. But I will tell you it's not for everybody. You have to love it or you hate it. There's usually no in between. But once you've done it, I can tell you this. Anybody who I know who's gotten out early, within 2 years misses it and wish they could get back. Okay? It is a life-changing career path. Okay? You see the best of what America can offer in a certain just small segment. I can leave my wallet on the ground in a military base and nobody will take it. Okay? They'll fight themselves to bring it back to me. Please, thank you, no ma'am, yes ma'am, you know, certain formality. It's kind of nice. You know? On a military base, everybody drives the speed limit. Because you'll get in trouble, of course, if you go like, you know, just a hair over that. Okay? But you get some housing and things of that nature. But ultimately, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that background also leads to civilian employment. Okay? From the civilian side, not only can you become a government civilian employee, still doing counter-threat finance and other things, okay? And you can work for any of the geographic combatant commands. So let's talk about locations, okay? Like ideal locations. So U.S. Southern Command, we call it Southcom, okay? It's out of Doral. If you work for EUCOM, that's obviously Europe. And AFRICOM, you're in Stuttgart, Germany. Not a bad place to hang out. Okay? If you work for PACOM, you're in Hawaii, Pearl Harbor. Okay? Not too shabby. Okay? If you join the Air Force, I can tell you this, you always have better food than the Army. Okay? In fact, I think they build the golf courses before they build the base. We call them the chair force. Okay, this is going to be on YouTube, so yes, I just said it. You know. So from the civilian side, once you've done the military side and you've gotten all your credentials, all your background, all your professional training, you also get clearances, security clearances. Okay? Top secret clearance, not too shabby, right? Sounds kind of cool. But that will lead you into civilian employment. Starting salaries there, 120 to 160, depending on what you bring to the table. If you're willing to travel, like Dr. Crane can tell you, I travel probably 50% of the time, if not more. Depending on the contracts you're working on, $250. Okay? So not a terrible career path. Be careful with all the deployments. You come back a little changed each time. I know folks who were out there for like 7 to 10 years, made a ton of money, but now it's like a different race of people. We don't understand like how other civilians operate. You know, like why do you guys argue over parking spaces? Seriously, like this is all that important, you know. So there is another side to it besides just the civil accounting side. Okay, the reserves. I will tell you that my recommendation to folks is the reserves. Why? Because just when the Army drives me crazy, I can go back to civilian life. Once I'm in civilian life too long, I'm like, okay, I got to get out of this. They're driving me crazy. Like, literally, your 1040s due every year at the same time. Why are you showing up here 2 hours before closing? Seriously. Every year, this is what I got to deal with? No. So I go back to the Army. Okay? Audits. Got to love audits. Got to love them. You know, it sounds so sexy. You know? But even then, some days, you just want to take yourself out. So that's why the reserves allows you to do, at minimum, a weekend each month and 2 weeks a year. That's your minimum requirement. Okay? Not bad. Okay? They give you a cool uniform, the boots, You know, you got to stay in shape. Okay? So those of you who have trouble running at least 2 miles, start practicing now. Okay? They're changing all that too now. They're making it tougher. Okay? So now we have to do deadlifts. We have to actually like hang from a pole and all this other stuff. It's supposed to be more realistic to what we would be doing in a combat situation. It's going to hurt a lot of people just because, you know, I'm 47 now. My back is killing me. Okay? Yeah, the airplane seats don't help either. And I'd like to actually let my hair grow out too, you know, one of these days. This bad haircut is getting old. So, as far as some of the tradecraft is concerned, so I'll only be able to talk about the open source type stuff. Sorry. I know you all were waiting for the Rosetta Stone type of cool stuff. There are so many, like Jack Ryan and all this other stuff. I mean, I watch Ozarks and all these other programs that come out, and you're thinking, oh, this is going to be so cool. It's not like that. Okay? Nobody ever gives me all of the information within like 24 hours, and then like literally something else happens. It doesn't work that way. Investigations can take a very long time. Okay? U.S. Southern Command is involved deeply with the sanctions that are happening against Venezuela. Okay, we work with OFAC right there in the room. We have FBI there. We have DEA. We have all the 3-letter agencies nearby. Communications, processes, procedures. It takes time. It's not a quick fix. I know everybody was like, "Wow, how come we haven't just gone into Venezuela?" It just doesn't work that way. Okay. My wife is from Venezuela. Every time I come home, every time I come home, she's like, when are we attacking? Like, you know, like, is it over? You know, and I'm like, well, turn on the news. I mean, like, didn't you, you know, yeah, you know, she thinks, you know, that I have all these secrets to her sometimes just to mess with her. I'm like, yes, I know it all, but I'm not telling you. It's the few times I get anything over my wife, trust me. That woman she's not a formal auditor, but she might as well be. I mean. Okay, and she hits really hard. And I also said that on video too. So if you ever see me with scars, you know who did it. And my mother-in-law, very special. I couldn't resist. I'm on film, you know. So, you know, that's the career path. That's what you can do with it. It's not just sitting behind a desk. You know, you get out in the field. You're doing document exploitation. So we used to go to, in Afghanistan, you do a raid on a hawala. Have you all learned about hawalas? Have you talked about hawalas? Okay. Wow. Okay, that would be like a very long class, but imagine an informal banking system, okay, in which I come to you and I give you money, you write it down in a ledger, and then somebody else comes to you and says with a code number, and you give them money. And then at some point, you all will reconcile accounts. Someday, somehow, in the future. But there's multiple hawalas involved, okay? So we would show up. Think of it like a Western Union, just not as formal, with 2 sets of books. So we'd show up, you know, all impressive, and we'd start going through their ledgers and trying to figure out the codes and what's going on. So you're in the field. It's not as fancy as Jack Ryan, but you're in the field. You do have opportunities to fly around. When I was in Afghanistan, I spent time in Kandahar, Bagram, Kabul, Helmand province as well too. It's like my version of a combat tourism, okay? So you can kind of see the world as well too. So I want to make it both boring and exciting all at the same time. And really, you know, I've kind of talked a lot, so I'd like to open it up for questions. Okay.
I have a couple of questions, so
Sure.
I'm scared to ask. I don't know, they're silly questions. but-
No, and I won't hurt you, I promise.
Okay. So you're talking about opium being the main source of income in Afghanistan, and I know it seems super controversial, especially for people who want the state to protect its individual citizens, but it almost seems like we're inviting all of this conflict because it's not legal. If they legalized opium, then they could be part of the grander economy. Everyone's in charge of themselves.
Sure.
I mean, I know it's an epidemic, especially in the Midwest and all over the country, really. But you know, if we increased education, but just allowed people to make their own decisions, sounds very libertarian, and I'm not a libertarian, but you know, it just seems like then they could feel like they're part of the world economy. Maybe they would change their minds about what their
Sure.
what their goals are. You know, maybe they wouldn't be anti-U.S. The U.S. is actually including them in a larger global economy, and then, you know, they would start to develop their land, or we could have contracts with them. It wouldn't be illegal, you know,
Sure.
with other enemy states to have American contracts with, you know, enemy states for development, for
Can we
construction.
repeat the question for the folks online, or as much as we can?
So to repeat the question online,
They didn't hear.
they heard it?
Yes.
They heard it? Okay. Good, because that was going to be. I was going to paraphrase as best as possible, I swear. So your question is very interesting, and the Taliban is probably the wrong example. Afghanistan, it's not just opium. So as far as their income streams, so one of the projects I had for Afghanistan was I actually did a financial assessment on Taliban finances. So just like you all would do, you figure out all the income as much best as possible. You figure out all your expenses, try to net it all out, and figure out, hey, what's left over, and then for operations purposes, things of that nature. So opium, or the drug traffic, I misstated. It was actually number 3. Extortion was number 1 as internal corruption. Okay, even corruption internally on their side and internally on our side, because we went in there with a lot of contracts to rebuild schools, mosques, water, and they would rob us blind. To put it bluntly, they would rob us blind. So but I think the broader question is the legalization of drugs in general. Because the Taliban as a organization is guilty about a lot of things. So more to legalize their money and to make operations easier for them. I mean, just imagine all the atrocities that would be committed. You know, and as there's women in the room, I can tell you, you're not treated very fairly in that society. We'll just leave it at that. But in terms of overall, you know, should marijuana be made legal? It's definitely the debate that's taking place. The war on drugs. If we're rating the war on drugs as a success or a failure, it's been a failure. It just has been, because we have not really stemmed the tide. So let's just take Colombia as an example. So the FARC becomes now a legitimate political party. The peace process takes place. I use the example of the man on the mountain with the rifle who's counting. So the Secretariat, which is their senior leadership, they're just like us. They want to have Harleys and McDonald's and travel. Okay, so that's where all the money really resides, the power and the control. They go on to have happy lives and spend cash. The folks on the bottom, so that guy on the mountain with that rifle, he's only had a life of crime and extortion, and that rifle still gives him power. He's not going to come off that mountain to work minimum wage, and just because the others want to. unfortunately. And that is now the reality within Colombia, that these groups, okay, and even cartels, once you take out the leaders, then the ones below them are actually more vicious and more dangerous. One could argue we realized that after Iraq with Saddam, okay? So you have to keep all these things in mind. Sometimes it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. And I've had this debate myself too. Hey, we should just legalize the whole thing, and we just go about our business, and we'll tax it and somehow, but it's going to fall on employers. Let's be honest with you. Okay, do you want your accountant to be high? Okay, he's got your social security information, your banking information, your credit card information, all of this information. People in Miami can't drive right now, whether it's raining or not. So I think it's a little bit more than just, unfortunately on this particular topic, it's a little bit more than just the money and what would happen. But it's a valid question and something that everybody's having to deal with, just because, again, the federal government has one law and now the states are doing another. So personally, I believe that eventually all the states are going to legalize marijuana at some point. It's going to be just the national experiment to see what happens. But I think it'll fall on the employers now to deal with it in terms of drug testing. So it's legal, but you're not going to be allowed to do it. That type of thing. Okay, so any other questions? I'm sorry. Either one.
Well, you were mentioning the hawalas, and at least from what I understand, not a whole lot, it's kind of like the thing that kind of pops up when you don't have a formalized banking system. It's just out of necessity, it's like an informal, lending into the thing.
Yeah.
How much of what you saw there was, I guess, signal versus noise, or how much of that was, because it's like if it's something that's always there, it's not necessarily always nefarious. It's just a thing that people do.
Correct. Absolutely correct. So the biggest investigative problem, whether you're on a DOD side or just regular U.S. law enforcement, even on an IRS, is, look, is this just simple tax evasion, or are we trying to really do something, seriously nefarious? Okay, are we all have those miscellaneous deductions. Okay, that travel budget that grows, was that truly just travel? Like you went to Disney World and claimed it as a business expense, or were you paying a politician? Okay, like did you pay for their trip to Disney World and still try to write it off? So you had your cake, you ate it too, and then you complained you got fat on it. Okay? It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. You don't want to roll up innocent people with bad people. But on the hawalas, to go back to your point, it's been around for a very long time. Okay? In a lot of Islamic communities, interest doesn't exist. You're against their religion to actually charge interest. So there's a different process for lending. Okay, they don't call it lending, but there's a different process for it. Hawalas have existed because you're right, there wasn't a Chase branch at each mountaintop. Okay, but those individuals, because they have no regulation and no rules besides an honor system, okay, has been infiltrated, okay, and that's where you have to go through it, and they're not very transparent themselves. So that's part of the problem too. They're also not paying taxes, and and they're not funding the overall community. So they're usually also leaders in the community, and they have their own hierarchy as terms of power and politics. So it's a tough nut, and it's going to be the same that we're going to see, like now we're looking at like cyber crimes and things of that nature, the dark web, cryptocurrency. How are we going to start dealing with that? Ultimately, what saves us on that side is that it's not a stable marketplace. So the criminals don't they understand they're going to lose some money on transactions. So when we talk about black market peso exchange and things of that nature, and I'll give Dr. Crane some of our training scenarios we use. You've seen some of those. We get pretty in-depth as far as money flows through countries, okay? The biggest problem is trying to find those patterns and anomalies to figure out what right looks like versus wrong. Okay. You had a question?
I guess this question is in a different spectrum, but sure. How would you go about or advise to folks that they want to go out and sort of work on a career in the private sector, okay, and then jump into surveys? Do you see sort of like recommendation time frame of how much time to do on one side and still have enough time to go into service and develop a career
Sure.
of growth?
That's a very good question. As soon as I figure out the answer to that, I'll let you know. I'm faced with that, so I can tell you what I've done right and what I've done wrong. I wish I joined the reserves younger, first of all. 20 years of service is really the length of time for full retirement, okay? When you're younger, you're in better shape. You can do a little bit more things. You're still young enough in which you have a lot more options and choices within the military. So the Army, in terms of branches, has the most amount of mission occupational specialties. There's a job literally for everybody. If you want to be a doctor, you can do it in the Army. If you want to be a nurse, you can do it in the Army. If you want to be a pilot, if you want to be a logistician, if you want to be an electrician, if you want to go into IT, networking, media, the band, okay, you can do that all within the Army. There's literally a job for all of that, and they'll train you for all of this too. From the private side of it, if I had to do it all over again, not because I'm in an accounting department class, I would have done just accounting. Finance is something you can learn on the job. That's my opinion. So if there's a finance teacher here, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to cut your income, but I think the accounting side is just, I've seen accountants, that foundation, that strong foundation makes a whole world of difference later on, okay? Whether you just go in for business for yourself or the counter-threat finance, or you're just doing the pure retail type of accounting. So I would definitely do the accounting track, get some specialization education-wise. The military will require you, if you want to be an officer and you want to get promoted, you have to have a master's degree. So it's required. Either you're paying for it or they're paying for it, but you got to have it. So, if you went and got a master's degree, that's definitely going to help you in terms of certifications. ACAMS provides a foundation as far as money laundering, just so that you can talk the same language with your peers. That's why the government employees are now doing ACAMS certification, not because they don't already know the material, but they want to make sure they're at the same level as the private sector. So everybody's talking the same language. Whether it's 311 actions, sanctions investigations, who's who in the Treasury, you just need to know all of those things. The question is, how much of both can you possibly do? Okay? Because of course, if you get your cushy job with PricewaterhouseCoopers, you may not want to spend more than 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year in the military. See what I'm saying? Will they hold your job while you do this? Yes, it's by law, by the way. So you can have your cake and eat it too. Okay. If you work for yourself, not so much. Okay. I would tell folks the reserves gives you the best of both worlds. And that's why I did it personally. Active duty is great, but it comes with its own other challenges as well too. Remember, you're active duty. So just like I said to you, you are always going to have to know how to maneuver, shoot, and communicate. You are an intelligence officer for the U.S. Army. If I need you to go to XYZ country and just be a military intelligence officer for a rotor wing, and you have to make sure that they don't get shot down, that's your job. You could be a brilliant accountant, but that's what I need you to do right now. So you just have to understand that that does exist as well too. Okay, but I haven't figured it out either. So I've been in the reserves for 10 years. I've been called up to active duty 5 out of those 10 years. Okay, so like I said before, I don't regret any day in uniform, but I do regret that the Army has always called me in the worst possible times. I've missed my daughter's first birthday, her first steps, you know, just those life events, sometimes you're just not around. So, any other questions?
Questions from online?
Sure.
When you find the money, what happens then? Who takes over to make formal charges to the group or persons committing the crimes?
That's a good question. So, I'd like to say I take the money first. No. Yeah, it doesn't happen, unfortunately. So once we find, well, let me back up. 2 differences. If I'm forward deployed in a combat zone, then it's all handled by DOD, okay? As far as the arrest is concerned and things of that nature, sometimes we'll do it with the partner nation directly. So in Afghanistan, we had the Afghan military involved. They would arrest them, they would confiscate the money. Theoretically, it happened in Afghanistan, so it's the Afghans' money. It's not our money, the U.S.'s money. If we are assisting, so let's talk about Venezuela to make it just a little bit more accurate. So if I'm assisting in the research and the investigation process with OFAC, ultimately it's an OFAC decision whether or not they're going to sanction or move it into a law enforcement aspect, and it's going to be law enforcement that will actually do the arrest and confiscation, and then after that it depends if it's a seizure or, you know, whatever law enforcement action is going to take place, whatever they determine, and it goes to court and things of that nature. So we can give the information to the IRS, and the IRS could use it. So it's up to, ultimately it's going to be up to the Department of Justice really at that point. It's, you know, it's on U.S. soil, so U.S. law enforcement takes over.
Do you recommend that students graduate first, or before if they join the reserves or plan on joining the reserves?
Yes,
Okay.
wholeheartedly. So if you have a bachelor's degree, you can go directly in as an officer. You can actually do kind of a couple different tracks. So I'm what's called a direct commission, which I'm not exactly sure if I want to recommend it to folks because there's certain things that are really bad about it. So I went from a civilian uniform to a military uniform, and I only got 27 days worth of training. Those 27 days are pretty rough. You're trying to figure out, first, why can't I put my hands in my pocket? Like, that's why I have pockets for. Like, no, in the military, you can't put your hands in your pocket unless you're grabbing something. They're actually to hold things, not for you to hang out in. Okay? You can't eat and walk in uniform. So I got stopped one time in Fort Benning. This is the home of the infantry, and I was eating an apple. I got stopped. What are you doing? You can't do that. I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, you're eating. And I'm like, yes, I'm eating. And they're like, well, you can't walk and eat. And I'm like, but I can also tap my head and my tummy at the same time. You know, I'll show you that trick next. So it's, when you're direct commission, it's a little rough because you miss a lot of the drill and ceremony and some of the military doctrine that comes in with just starting from basic. Okay? But to answer the question, once you graduate, then you can go in directly as an officer, whether you do it through ROTC while you are currently studying. And if you do ROTC while you're studying, they'll actually pay for your studies. They'll give you a stipend to study. They'll let you graduate and finish. And then from there, you can determine kind of what your track is going to be. So I would wholeheartedly recommend graduating. It's a question of whether or not you want the military to pay for it now or later. Okay? And they have loan repayment programs as well, too. Anything else from online?
Yeah, there's actually, how would you describe your typical day in your SOCOM duty, and where do you get the time to be a managing partner of a CPA firm?
Yes. Well, this is terrible that it's online, because all my partners are watching this probably at some point. Okay, so I have partners in the firm. They love and hate my my military obligations. So what we've had to do in the firm to allow me to plug out is a lot of training within the firm. We've hired, we have 2 extra people who are assigned to me to make my life easier. You know, if you text me on WhatsApp, you are probably not talking to me. Okay, you're probably talking to one of them. The emails, let's say a 70-30 split, you might be talking to me. And that's really their job, to funnel me information as best as possible. Technology has completely helped me out with the ability of GoToMeetings, WhatsApp, and all the other little bells and whistles that exist. Clients don't come to your office as often as possible. The traffic in Miami, so we have multiple offices. So my people in Doral want to go to my Doral office. They don't want to go to Coral Gables. The Coral Gables people don't want to go anywhere. We have an office in the Keys. They hate everybody in Miami. Okay? And they will only go to the Keys. So that's kind of how we make it work. All of my leave time that I have, I usually do spend it on the firm too. So like, for example, I'm taking leave on Monday to go down to the Keys office. So that's how I spend my leave time. So it's not perfect. I know that goes back to the last question. How do I do it? Just give up sleep. That's usually how it all works.
One more question.
Go ahead.
No. Do you have
Oh,
time for one more question?
yeah. There is, I lost it. Oh, there it is. What is the most dangerous situation you have ever encountered while doing your military job?
Okay. What's my... Okay, so this is kind of one of those questions that we normally don't like to answer, I'll be honest with you. Don't ever ask a military guy, you know, have you killed anybody? That's really a bad question to ask. Most dangerous situation. So, you know, I've been on bases that have been rocket attacked. I've been in helicopters. I've been in up-armored vehicles. You know, stuff happens. But I would also tell you that as dangerous as all that sounds, you all drive on I-95. And you are more likely to be hurt, maimed, or killed on I-95 than in the military. So thank God with the medical evacs and things of that nature, if you look at even after more than 14 years worth of war, still more people die in car accidents than by military action. So if my wife is watching, I'm fine. It's okay. Anybody else?
Okay, well, thank you, Captain George. This is, I'll take my hands out of my pocket and you should.
Yeah, I do love it though. So like, it's funny because you'll see me, I do this, which is parade rest, okay? And this is how you stand normally when you're listening to somebody. And so by force of habit now, you will see literally my brain change from civilian to military as I'm trying to communicate with folks. It was very hard just not to talk in acronyms to you all.
So when I initially met with Captain George at my office in FAU, he was wearing his military hat, figuratively, and he was speaking all these acronyms, and some of them I knew and some of them I didn't, but I just nodded my head as if I knew what they were, because it really didn't matter, you know, with the whole bigger picture. But so this is quite all fascinating, right? You had forensic accounting you think about in the ordinary business world about one partner stealing from another, or cheating the IRS, or FBI, white collar crime and that sort of thing. But all of this is a brand new experience for most of us in hearing things. So thank you for coming in.
My pleasure.
And I would mention that since Captain George and I have met, we're kind of working on a couple of things. One is I assisted as much as I could because of the short notice in developing some very short educational material for something that was being done by, was it NATO?
No, so it's the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime. They do a financial disruption course. It takes place all over the world. I'm one of their instructors for it. This course was taking place in UAE, and so we were actually talking to their financial intelligence units there and instructing them on very similar as far as the whole pattern of life, the methodology, the audit process. We spend a day and a half just going through the audit process for an investigation, talking about patterns. And so FAU was very nice enough to provide me some material to get these folks up to speed. So you'd be surprised how difficult it is sometimes to talk about financial statements and then try to make sure that everybody in the room understands financial statements within an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then, okay, now let's go really deep dive into something else. And so FAU was very nice to provide me some of that material. In fact, going forward, that's really where we're hoping to engage with you all a little bit more. So we've provided already to FAU some information for like a real-time investigation, so that you can see some of the analysis that takes place and actually truly assist us in an investigation. It's not always perfect. I'd like to tell you that, again, you get all balance sheets, financial statements, and everything's very laid out, cut and dry. There's a 10K. Doesn't work that way. So so really, we're learning from you as much as you all are learning from us.
So that was the second thing I was going to mention is Captain George provided me with real data and is asking for some help from FAU in analyzing it. And just the short version is it's information about money transfers between United States locations and an offshore location. And the idea is basically analyze it using whatever digital analytics there are to look for patterns, and presumably they're kind of like the intelligence aspect of that, and if there are patterns, presumably it gets turned over to operations for further investigations or what have you.
Correct. Yeah, where we're lacking now as far as the transition of now our professional status, artificial intelligence, being able to just crunch the amount of data that exists. So when we have our next Miami course, you all are more than welcome to attend. But that's the biggest problem we have. So if you think back to the information that the banks have themselves, the number of suspicious activity reports that are being generated, I think 55,000 a day, something ridiculous like that. That's got to get crunched by something. And if we can figure out how to be more efficient as far as looking at that data, more quickly we're able to put boots on the ground and affect change. So that is where this assistance is coming from. We only have just so much time and so many people. So this is a good project for you all to cut your teeth on and help out as well.
Okay, well, thank you once again, and I appreciate everybody joining us either in person or online. And I believe this is going to be recorded up on YouTube, so enjoy. All right, take care. Have a great day.